The final reviews for Diablo 4 have dropped, and we're going to be reacting to Force Gaming's one because that is the most comprehensive when it comes down to talking about the massive open world and how much time you can spend. The Endgame explained, the Paragon boards, world bosses, there seems to be not much there. How the PvP and Endgame loop works and what you should be doing. The monetization, yes, the gold store in the game that is coming, and also the biggest concerns. We're going to go over this and react to every single point. Let's begin with the point, massive open world, because it's also touching down on how long the game actually is.
As you're doing the main story quest, which will have you following through the narrative of the game from one beat to the next, you're also just moving through the open world. And this, hands down, is one of my favorite aspects of Diablo 4. It's got a massive open world map with...
The map is gigantic, and heads up, there's a link in the description below to the interactive Diablo map. So you essentially see where every dungeon is and where also to get every single aspect or Lilith statue. I know some of you like to discover the Lilith statues, but I just want to click them down and not be bothered to actually find every single one.
0 loading screens as you move between zones, and you'll explore various biomes, checking out different points of interest with a bunch of different things to do. There are 5 distinct regions in the game, each of which have their own theming based off of some real world locations with unique monsters and activities. And this is actually something that I don't want to spoil to you. Like, I'm not going to give you a lot of the specifics of the interesting stuff I see in the open world, mainly because the exploration and discovery of everything while playing here was a big chunk of what I enjoyed. The game world, first of all, is huge, and I mean, it's absolutely massive. I didn't even clear...
That's something you might have never heard in your life before. That's okay. Me neither.
Every single area of the map after a full week of playing the game. It's just very, very large, tons of space, and there's a large variety of things to see.
This is exactly what I wanted to hear. Like, I want to spend time exploring the map throughout World Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. I mean, even if I beat World Tier 1 and go into World Tier 3, I don't want to have seen everything, right? There should still be regions to uncover, especially with the Tree of Whispers. That's what we're going to come to later.
As for things to do, well, it is an open world game, and if you played Fractured Peaks, you know pretty much everything. Just the variety is mixed up a bit. Besides the overworld being full of various types of monsters to smash, it's also consisting of dungeons, events, strongholds, side quests, and collectibles. So you got all this stuff out in the open world to discover and engage with, which you will come across just naturally as you play through the campaign and as it takes you through each of the zones, guiding you from one region to the next. Oh, and also the mounts. These are unlocked via a side quest when you get about halfway through, somewhere around level 35 or 40, I think is when we got it. And
that's kind of fine, 35 to 40. I mean, if you consider that 25 took you 2 hours in the beta, so 35 to 40 is relatively fast to get, that you can then zoom with the mount over all the regions.
When you get the mount, it is a massive help, really, especially since the game and the world is so big. They've got like a basic gallop speed, but also a dash, which will boost your movement temporarily. It's got 3 charges that just constantly refill with time. And every class also has a unique dismount attack. So yeah, the game is really big. There's a lot of activities and there's plenty of stuff to keep you busy. But remember, the main thing, if you want to progress into Endgame, is simply finishing the story. So playing through the entire campaign took me around 11 hours. And
that's okay. I mean, 11 hours, considering that that was a review version and had to go through fast without doing everything available.
I was level 43 when turning in the final quest. But please bear in mind, I was playing at a fairly quick pace, but not as fast as possible. Given I knew that the review window was limited and I only had so much time to play, I was just mostly interested in getting to endgame quickly, just for the sake of seeing it and learning about it and checking out the different systems. So that said, between the campaign and exploration of this huge open world with all the stuff we talked about, I could see it taking many more hours to complete. Like, I could easily see people spending 30, 40, or even 50 hours just doing open world stuff in addition as they're moving throughout the campaign.
And if you want to finish every single region, if you want to get the renown up of every single region to unlock like all the bonus skill points and everything, it's definitely going to be more than 11 hours. But also keep in mind that you want to be World Tier 3 technically before you 100% everything. Why? Because World Tier 3, you start dropping unique items. Whereas in World Tier 1 and 2, there's no unique items. So in World Tier 3, there are unique items. And that's why you kind of want to get there as fast as possible while still being strong enough to actually do it.
That is certainly possible. But on the flip side, I could also see people finishing the campaign in way fewer than 11 hours because I wasn't exactly beelining it. I did spend some time doing some side stuff, doing some dungeons, exploration, public events, things like that. So how long it takes you to go through the campaign is totally just going to depend on your playstyle because the campaign is weaved into the open world. And as we touched on, there is a lot to the open world. I mean, honestly, you could play for 100+ hours before you finish the campaign if you're just also doing all the open world stuff as you move throughout. But once you finish the campaign, it's time for Endgame. And this is where, as ARPG and MMO players would say, this is where the real game begins. So the first system that you're introduced to is the Tree of Whispers. On its face, it's pretty straightforward.
This is one that I'm most interested in.
Objectives that pop up all over the world, spread out between the different zones. So each task that you have will be worth a set number of favors. Once you collect 10 favors, you return to the tree and you collect a reward. Now, when I first heard about this system, I kind of wrote it off because I basically assumed it was just like any side quest, daily quest system or the bounty system from Diablo 3, right? And yes, in a lot of ways it is, but also, as I was playing, I found myself really enjoying the fact that this system pushed me to revisit old areas, but then also brought me to explore new ones that I hadn't yet seen. And these objectives are also always in these clusters. This
is why it's interesting to not 100% everything or not discover the whole map before you actually get the Tree of Whispers, because then you might actually have to go somewhere, not just for the sake of exploring, no, for the sake of exploring, plus getting bonus XP, items, favors, more.
Essentially takes a few areas within each zone and will give you a grouping of activities in one particular space. So these activities will include completing a dungeon, clearing a cellar, killing a variety of enemies in the area, turning in these collectibles, and then finishing one of those open world events that we discussed. So while the exact activities are constantly changing, their locations and which ones are available are rotating on a regular basis, and there will be multiple clusters up at any given time, the general structure of each grouping of the Tree of Whisper quest is what I just listed, and the harder objectives also reward more favors. So for example, if you clear a cellar, it's worth 1 favor, but if you do a dungeon, it's worth 5, and you just have to reach 10 before you can go collect your reward from the tree. And this was a great way to fill up low-level pieces. It was a great way to level up and get experience. It was a great way to see more of the world. Overall, even though it is just like a daily quest system, just like a bounty system,
it might just be like a daily quest system or a bounty system, but end of the day, not everyone has hours and hours and hours to play. So sometimes you just want to get on and be like, oh, these are my Tree of Whispers. I can do X, Y, Z, and then I'm done. It's this little feeling of accomplishment as a mom or a dad. Like your child is sleeping, you have like 30 minutes to an hour. Well, do 1 or 2 Tree of Whispers, do 1 or 2 quests. This is good. Not for the gamers that game every single day for 24 hours. No, for the gamers that don't have that much time and they want to still achieve something.
Because the world is so big and because I hadn't ever seen all of it and because it was a good source of experience and a good source of filling up low-level loot pieces, I really liked engaging with it and constantly going out into the world, doing this cluster of activities, going back to the tree, getting experience, getting loot, then going out to another spot and just continuously doing this over and over again. So the Tree of Whispers is the first and only endgame activity that you can do immediately after clearing the campaign. The rest of it is actually locked behind World Tier 3, which in order to progress to, you have to clear the Capstone dungeon. So the Capstone dungeon is this set level activity that basically acts as a barrier to you progressing world tiers. Enemies inside have a hard locked level, which if you are too far below is going to be really difficult. So when I finished the campaign, as mentioned, I was level 43. The Capstone dungeon to go from world tiers 2 to 3 is set to level 50. Now I tried immediately going in, but I just wasn't doing enough damage and enemies would kill me too quickly. So I spent a few hours doing those Tree of Whisper quests, leveling up, gearing up, and then once I got to level 50, I jumped back into the...
I really like this because it kind of works as a noob blocker. So if they would just let you go straight up into Torment with level 43, you would just get frustrated as hell because you just die, and you would feel like your character's weak, your progression wasn't good, you made something wrong. But they kind of force you to really get to level 50 to then be also ready for Torment.
the Capstone. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think this thing has been a bit oversold in the past as being some massive challenge. In reality, it's just like a slightly longer than normal dungeon run. I mean, there are some cool enemies inside that you fight, but for the most part, it is really straightforward, and it just acts as like a level or a gear check. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was like somewhat difficult at times, but there really weren't any interesting surprises or real new mechanics that I noticed compared to any other dungeon run in the game.
That's what I
just
assumed.
kind of some like tough grouping of enemies at times. Although the boss fight was really cool, like a lot of the other boss fights in Diablo 4. I really enjoyed it.
If
I'll
you spoil
definitely
that.
give them that. Speaking of which, I know I haven't really discussed boss fights thus far. For one, we're not going to be revealing them for spoiler's sake, like the names of the campaign bosses. But I will tell you this much: the big ones that are in the campaign, as well as the boss in the Capstone dungeon, I thought they were pretty good, really interesting, both in the boss design and mechanic design departments. I just thought many of these were interesting, cool encounters that I really liked. Okay, so once you finish the World Tier 2 Capstone dungeon, you then unlock access to World Tier 3.
Nightmare
With
dungeons.
that, you gain access to the rest of the Endgame, and that is including the Nightmare dungeons and Helltides, as well as when you're introduced to the champion monsters, which add an extra level of challenge with their new affixes and resistances. And this is when you're going to start seeing sacred and unique items dropping. So sacred items are just like higher item level versions of everything below legendary, whereas the unique items are altogether different. These will drop with set in stone stat types and affixes, which will just change depending on the item level that they drop at. And some of these uniques come with really cool abilities. For example, I found the Ice Heart Pants, which made it so that enemies who died while frozen would have up to a 20% chance to...
No, that's cool. I really have to look into all the Necromancer uniques. They are known in the internet already.
unleash a new Frost Nova, which would then basically just chain freeze everything. As I was blowing up groups of enemies, I Frost Nova
That's why you want to get a World Tier 3.
and then ones that die have a pretty good chance to blow up into another Frost Nova, and it just keeps happening. It's really, really cool stuff. So yeah, anyways, World Tier 3, better loot starts dropping, more interesting loot starts dropping, there's harder enemies to fight, and you've got more things to do. And it was really at this point that I felt like the game started to open up and the combat was getting a lot more engaging because it was more difficult, because there were new activities and all of that. One of those activities...
That's a good point. We've been saying, do you go World Tier 1 or World Tier 2 in the beginning? World Tier 2 might be slightly more challenging than World Tier 1, but realistically, if you just want to go through the games, you want to get to level 50, World Tier 1 is just the better choice as you're questing, side questing, and that's where the most XP is, which doesn't get hired by World Tier 2. And then World Tier 3 actually starts the game and the difficulty and gets you probably engaged.
These being the Helltides. So Helltides rotate on and off every other hour. This basically takes over 2 large regions in one of the game's 5 main zones. These entire areas turn red essentially, like with hellfire raining from the sky. This is an actual mechanic. Sometimes you'll have to dodge it as it falls down.
Sounds
and then
like
enemies
PUBG.
within the Helltide drop this resource called cinders. So basically, you just go into the Helltide, farm groups of enemies, do events, and kill bosses, which these areas do have these unique roaming Helltide specific bosses. All of this gives you cinders. You gather up as much as possible within the hour that's available, and then you take those cinders to these chests located all around the Helltide, and there will be different types of chests for weapons, for armor, for rings, and amulets. So you turn your cinders in, you get a random drop of the type that's listed on the chest. You'll know ahead of time if it's like a two-handed weapon, if it's a helm,
Great
if they're
animation
pants,
on the
if it's
chest.
a ring or amulet. You'll see what the chests are. You turn in however many cinders you collected that are required for that chest, and you get a random drop. And these do seem to have a very high likelihood of dropping legendary or higher items. On multiple occasions, I would actually get several sacred pieces from a single chest, which was really good. And it seems like Helltides are great if you were looking for specific legendary or sacred aspects for your particular build, as it lets you turn in exactly for the type of gear that you're looking for. You just have to find the right chest within the Helltide. And sometimes if you are really lucky, an area can be both within a Helltide and also have Tree of Whisper quests located in there at the same time.
Double trouble.
In which case you're just getting like a ton of value from farming in that particular area. Great opportunity when those things sync up to farm a bunch of gear. It's really cool, really cool. And next up are the Nightmare dungeons, and this is really like the bread and butter of Diablo 4's endgame. It is the one main activity that has an ever-increasing difficulty as you continuously unlock higher and higher sigils, which are basically like keys that open up the Nightmare dungeons. And these higher levels push enemy monster levels higher and higher above the max character.
Okay, what do we have? This is the Gulren Kana's Nightmare Sigil tier 24. Revives allowed 4 Gulren Canals and Dry Stabs. You find more items from enemies. Stormbane Wrath chases players around, releasing deadly pulses when reaching a player. Monster attack speed, monster physical resistance, monster vulnerability resist. Okay.
Character level of 100. This is the progressive difficulty thing that you'll be working on as you continue leveling, gearing up, and powering up. You're just trying to push higher level nightmare dungeons. That's like the main goal, basically. So how does it work? Well, it's pretty simple. You will start off getting random low-level sigils. You'll just get them as you play after you progress into World Tier 3, and this will grant you access to a nightmare version of one particular dungeon in the game. So the nightmare variants will add a bunch of modifiers, changing things up a bit. There's going to be some sort of buff for your character, like sometimes it'll increase a certain type of damage or increase your attack speed. It'll increase your resistances, making you more tanky. But then also there are going to be more enhancements for the enemies, making them tougher, making them
Nightmare Portal. While in combat, Nightmare Portals open randomly near players. Yeah, I heard about that. That's crazy.
them deal more damage, even in a lot of cases making them explode when they die or leave pools of damage on the ground. But the most interesting thing is that these will also sometimes add an additional dungeon mechanic. So this includes something like the Drifting Shade, where you'll get this little shade that chases the player, exploding when it reaches them. This will deal damage, but then also create a field on the ground that dazes if you walk into it. Or there's this rock pillar that will follow closely behind you the entire time, pulsating damage whenever it gets close. Sometimes there are ones that will have lightning strikes periodically come down, and you have to get under this floating artifact in order to prevent the damage. Or there are ones that will have portals open up and constantly streaming in new monsters. The main point of doing these nightmare dungeons is to, beyond dropping loot at the end of them, to upgrade the glyphs for your Paragon board, which brings us to the Paragon board. Upon reaching level 50, you stop gaining new skill points and start progressing the Paragon board. So for every level, you unlock 4 new Paragon points to spend on your board. This board is basically an additional layer of character power progression outside of gear. So you begin with your classes start.
There's also a builder already, d4builder.gg, that has the whole Paragon board in, link in the description below, where you can already play around and test things and like see how stuff goes, because it's quite expensive to refund nodes.
Board. This is set, locked in place, and you start at the bottom and work your way up. There will be a bunch of normal nodes that will add minimal increases to things like strength, intelligence, willpower, or dexterity. Then also magic nodes that provide stronger boosts to various different stat types. There are then rare nodes that provide
Interestingly enough, they already nerfed the refund cost. It used to be 55,000 in a Forma beta. Now it's 3.572. That's really way cheaper.
Even more powerful boost and legendary nodes, and these basically act like additional pieces of gear as they reward what amounts to something equivalent to a legendary aspect. And then also dotted all throughout these boards are these empty glyph slots. You're gonna play, glyphs are gonna drop, and these things provide pretty big modifiers and enhancements basically to any of the nodes within the range of the glyph. So depending on the glyphs that you have, you'll have different glyphs that do different things, and if you find ones that are good for your build, you'll slot them into one of the empty glyph nodes on the Paragon board, and they're going to provide a really good boost to all of the nodes that surround them. And these are really strong enhancements. As mentioned, they can be further powered up by running those nightmare dungeons. So once you get a glyph that you really like,
oh, so you get into the Nightmare Dungeon and then that's how you upgrade them. I've been always asking myself, how do you actually get them higher? So you gotta go Nightmare Dungeons to actually upgrade your glyphs. Cool.
And that's good for your build. Odds are you're going to want to spend some time farming the Nightmare Dungeons specifically to level up the glyph. In a lot of ways, it's pretty similar to what running Rifts was in Diablo 3, which you were doing to level up gems. You're running Nightmare Dungeons in Diablo 4 to level up Paragon glyphs. All right, so a couple more endgame things we're going to touch on. First up, the world bosses. If you fought the world boss in Diablo 4's open beta, you know exactly what to expect with these. The boss will periodically spawn into the game. You're going to get a 30-minute warning before they show up. You go to the area, fight the boss, and collect the loot. So in the open beta, we fought Ashava the Pestilent. In the review build, I fought Ashava the Pestilent, and that was it. In all my time playing, I actually saw the world boss spawn 3 times, and
honestly, I like that they didn't show any more world bosses. I assume there was more out there, but there was no need to show more, to have like one big mystery left on release.
Every time, because I was unlucky, it was Ashava. Now, at the very least, there was some variety here for me because Ashava was located in other spawn locations. There will be set essentially boss arenas located around the map. So I fought Ashava, not in the Fractured Peaks at least, but I just kept fighting Ashava. I didn't see anyone else. Fortunately, Liam was playing as well and fought the other bosses.
Oh, he looks
so we
cool.
know what they do. First up, there is Avarice, the Gold Cursed. He's got various melee attacks, slams, and AoEs. He would stomp on the ground and puke, which you would have to dodge.
Well, reverse my former statement. I'm very happy seeing these guys right now. Fuck the mystery.
Occasionally, then he would teleport away and slam in when he teleports back into the arena. And then also he would form up these statues that occasionally would burst into these golden AoE pools. This boss was actually pretty straightforward and seems to be the least interesting of the world bosses in the game. And then there was Wandering Death. When he shows up, he's got this sound wave attack in which he would push it out and then summon it back towards him, damaging anything in his path. He would also summon up these large tornadoes that would spin around the arena. He had this charge up beam attack, which he would shoot out of both hands while spinning around. This was really cool looking, honestly. All of this just got progressively more intense to the point where eventually the boss was shooting out 3 of those beam attacks, which I thought was really cool looking. And that is actually it. Ashava, Avarice, and Wandering Death, as far as we know, are the only 3 world bosses that are in the game at release. So this is a bit of a disappointment here. One of the handful of disappointments I have with Diablo 4. I'll also say I was hoping that the other world bosses would have some more interesting mechanics, but everything seems pretty straightforward. Liam was able to solo the 2 additional bosses. None of these bosses seemed particularly challenging. It seems like the hardest part about these world boss fights will just be you dealing with the other players in your instance, scaling up the health of the boss, and if they don't carry their weight, that's going to be a bit of a pain. All right, and the final big endgame activity are the Fields of Hatred, or basically the PvP zones in Diablo 4. There are 2 of them in the game, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed because they are relatively small. The basic mechanic is really straightforward. There are these 2 Fields of Hatred. You go there, killing enemies or bosses or doing events in the region will drop these shards. You collect the shards, and then there are basically these extraction points. There's like 3 or 4 of them in each one of the PvP zones. They're located on the corners of the map. You go to the extraction point, dump your shards, and then after some 45-second timer, the shards turn into red dust, and then you're able to use that red dust.
Well, he says they're small, but that's a good thing for a PvPvE zone because that creates more clash. I mean, I don't want to go into a PvPvE zone and have to search for 10 hours to find a player. I want to go in and instantly notice there's conflict going on and find someone. I mean, that's why it's a PvPvE zone. It's just, so you actually find the others, right?
As a currency for vendors that sell cosmetics and gear. There's like a gambling vendor version of the PvP currency. So that's the basic system. And then of course PvP happens within here. Unfortunately, during the review build, there wasn't a lot of PvP that took place. So I am reserving final judgment. I mean, obviously the fact that I didn't actually get to experience PvP took away from the experience, but I'm also just surprised by how really small these zones are. It just feels like they might get really boring because they're just such pretty tiny arenas. They're very tiny spots, but whatever. I'm reserving final judgment until full release, when ideally we get to see these things in full swing with tons of other people.
We'll never do hardcore PvP.
One shot, right? With all that said, here is the basic end game loop and what you're doing and why. You're going to probably want to do the world boss and that Gathering Legion big open world event whenever they happen to pop up. You should also most likely do Helltides whenever they pop up if you are looking to farm specific slots, legendary aspects, or trying to get sacred items in those particular slots. Helltides are great for that. You will be fairly regularly wanting to farm nightmare dungeons in order to level up those glyphs for your Paragon board, and you're going to want to do Tree of Wisdom.
He didn't mention this, but why do you want to upgrade your glyphs? As you're in the Paragon board, you put the glyph in and it has a radius of, let's say, 5 fields in every direction. As you then level-wise upgrade it, this 5 fields in every direction will get bigger. So that's why you actually do want to upgrade the glyphs to get more nodes into the glyph area to be able to unlock the bonuses of the respective glyph.
Whispers if you're looking to level up, because they're great for experience as well as filling specific low item level gear slots, and you'll do PvP probably just for the fun of it. And that is the loop that I found myself doing. I would, when I felt like leveling up, I would do Tree of Whispers, or if I just wanted to explore and fill up empty low level gear slots, I would do Tree of Whispers. Whenever I saw the world boss or Gathering Legion, I would go do that. When Helltide was up, I would go do that, and I would just then, when Helltide or the World Boss / Legion event wasn't up, I would rotate between Tree of Whisper farming, Nightmare Dungeon farming, and going into the PvP zone, and as I just said, seeing nobody, unfortunately. So one big omission from the review build was the shop. They didn't have the shop in the game, but they did send us press kits that had screenshots as well as some B-roll of what the shop will look like, with what they are saying is the exact prices they plan to launch the shop with. So how does it look? Paid currency that you can buy ranges from costing up to $2 to up to $100. From $2 to $10, every $1 equals 100 currency. And then once you reach that $25 bundle, that's when they start adding those bonus free currencies in addition to the 2,500 that you would have got otherwise. And the point of this, of course, is to try to incentivize you to pony up to spend for that $100 bundle, as that is the one that gives the greatest amount of free currency, or the best value, as it is often called in these cash shops. So the cosmetics that we saw ranged in price from $13 for this Dress to Kill Rogue set all the way up to $28 for the Wraith Lord Necro set.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I'm sorry. I don't want to give them more money than they already have, but I'm a Nazgul.
And $28 appears to be the highest, most expensive cosmetic set that I saw in at least what they showed
part
us.
Of the problem.
And there's everything in between, a mix of variety of combinations with different cosmetic slots. Some of them will even include things like emotes and markings for your character. And then there was also this thing called an add-on that you could purchase. One that we saw was the Crypt Hunter add-on, which would give you a mount skin, a couple of cosmetics, and then 800 platinum.
Okay, that's just skins.
And that cost $20. So I mean, looking at this, it's pretty much everything that I expected. It's like a regular old cash shop. It doesn't really seem all that surprising. We knew this was going to be in the game. It's, you know, seeing $28 bundles in a game that's $70 at its cheapest, and one that's also going to be selling a season pass in mid-July, so like a month and a half after release. It's a lot of layers of monetization, but, you know, we knew this was coming. This part of the game is not at all surprising.
And as well, it's optional. You don't need a single skin. Don't buy it if you don't want it. I mean, end of the day, if you pick up items and you dress up your character, you can dress up them cool with the items. You don't actually need a bonus skin. That's only if you really, really love your character.
So that is a recap of the game and the systems. I do want to touch on some of the early dislikes and concerns that we had from playing the review build. While I do think some of the boss fights are really interesting, they're also incredibly easy. We really didn't see anything that was all that challenging. It seems like the most challenging, most difficult encounter in this game is going to be that pinnacle level 100 boss, but the Capstone dungeon bosses weren't all that difficult. The campaign bosses weren't all that difficult. The world bosses aren't all that difficult, and that is all really disappointing. I also feel like some of these counters, while they were interesting, they didn't feel all that unique or inspired, really, and I felt like playing a game like Lost Ark, I faced encounters and boss fights that had much more interesting and fresher takes on ARPG boss fight encounters. A lot of the boss fights in this game just kind of felt like variations of the bosses that I fought in Diablo 3, and I feel like that is a bit of a shame. I feel like Blizzard should have taken more risks.
I mean, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, what do you want to do, right? What hasn't been done before in any action RPG before? Like how do you want to like escalate to another level? I mean, there's so much Diablo out, there's so much Path of Exile, so many other games. You know, what's new to do? So I understand the sentiment, but at the same time, I'm like, what else? You know, what can be even done?
And that's probably one of my biggest critiques about Diablo 4 in general. I really like the core of what is here. It is super competent, it is fun to play, and I plan to play it, but I feel like they played it very, very, very safe, and they didn't take a lot of chances when it comes to mechanics and systems within the game. They just built a good feeling ARPG, they made it open world and MMO light, shared world, which I love both of those things, but it doesn't feel like it's really pushing the boundaries outside of that structure that they've built here. Some of the content
they essentially made the next Diablo. So I do exactly feel what he's saying there. This is just Diablo 3 plus, so it's just a new Diablo. It's not like the reinventing of the genre, the next big thing. It's just another Diablo, but that's exactly what people also wanted. In the main reviews that I've seen, or in the main complaints I've seen, people were like, we just want Diablo 2, but Diablo 4, but Diablo 2, but Diablo 4. So most people didn't actually want a new Diablo. They just want the old Diablo, but better, but with the same mechanics, but not new mechanics, but some new mechanics. People don't know what they want. So it is nothing groundbreaking, but it is a good package regardless.
In the game with things like the strongholds and the campaign bosses, they don't have ways to replay them really. Like they don't reset, making them repeatable, which is a shame because they are some of the cooler things in the game. I would love an opportunity to replay strongholds and fight campaign bosses again because both of those things are enjoyable to engage with, but we only get to do them one time around. Feels like the scaling is a bit wonky. A lot of people kind of complained about this a bit in the betas, but it's true for release as well. You'll basically fluctuate between things being incredibly hard but way too easy, all depending on the gear that drops. Maybe that's just working as intended because this is a loot game, but the scaling and the difficulty of things does not feel consistent and smooth. It feels like you hit these hard walls and then all of a sudden everything's way too easy, and that kind of yo-yos back and forth while you play. Speaking of which, tier 4 levels out a ton, and once you get good gear, it is no longer difficult and it really doesn't take that long. Tier 4, as a reminder, is the highest tier difficulty. You get to tier 4 and you hit this point where you gear up and everything is just easy, and then basically the rest of the game for the rest of the time is really easy at that point, with the only exception, and it's still good at least that this is here, is those nightmare dungeons, because as I mentioned, you will just keep getting higher and higher level keys that keep pushing the monster levels higher and making things more challenging, and that is the ever progressing difficult. It's not infinite progressing, but it is ever progressing up to a point, because eventually you'll hit level 100, you'll get all your best gear slots, you'll get your best...
I mean, I like that. Like, I don't want to struggle in a basic dungeon, end of the day. I mean, they should be fun to do, but it shouldn't be like, you know, nail-biting craziness. I want the nightmare dungeons, like, that I actually, like, tried to get the glyphs for. These should be, like, my magnum opus, you know, my big nemesis, the one thing where you struggle the most with the modifiers and everything. So I'm fine with that for myself, because that's where I'm looking for the challenge to really beat the nightmare dungeons. And not because I'm fighting Timmy in the open world and Timmy is suddenly like, you know, the difficulty of the level 100 boss.
Rolls, and then even those max level nightmare dungeons aren't going to feel that hard at that point. At least that is my assumption. Class balance still feels out of whack here, and I'm not talking specifically about endgame balance, but while leveling up. And while this doesn't really matter in the long run, it's pretty stark difference when you start off playing something like, say, the rogue or the sorceress in my example, and then you try switching to level up a barbarian or a druid. Both of those classes just feel terrible to start. Now the good news apparently is that they get really strong in the end game, but it would be nice if they didn't feel so underpowered in the leveling process. So now, after going over everything, talking about Diablo 4 content, talking about my experience in the review build, what I liked, what I didn't like, how long do I think I will be playing Diablo 4? Well, my guess is it's probably going to take about 2 to 3 weeks before I am geared and leveled up enough to clear the hardest content in the game, which is moving through those nightmare dungeons that will scale up.
And when we're talking about 2 to 3 weeks, he's talking about 2 to 3 weeks probably playing every single day. So as the normal gamer that has only 5 to, what do you have? Drop in the comments below. 5 to 10 hours maybe per week to play, if even. You know, moms and dads like 2 to 4 maybe 6. Like, you know, see that as a month plus and longer.
Up, right? And then eventually taking on that level 100 boss itself, which is what Blizzard has said is basically the pinnacle PvE challenge in the game at the moment. Now, there is, of course, a never-ending amount of loot that we can grind for as you search for perfect rolls and the highest end range values for various attributes and affixes on every piece of gear. But for me, typically, once I am geared to the point where I can clear the hardest or close to hardest content in these games, I'm pretty much satisfied with what I've seen. So yeah, my guess is that's going to be in the vicinity of 2 to 3 weeks, maybe up to 4, depending on my daily playtime. After which, you know, we could extend the amount of playtime if I'm screwing around with friends in PvP, or if I decide to level up a new character, which then would add another 2 to 4 weeks to my playtime, at which point we'll be nearing the start of season 1, which there you go, that should line up perfectly, and we'll play through season 1 and we'll see how long I continue to maintain interest there. A lot of that is going to hinge on how much they mix up this core experience, because yeah, the core experience, I'm probably looking at about 4 to 6 weeks before I feel like I've kind of run through everything and I'm pretty satisfied with where I'm at. That said, as mentioned earlier, a majority of Diablo 4's long-term success is going to hinge greatly on how substantial and how interesting that seasonal content ends up being. What I can tell you is that while I do think there's room for improvement here, and I would have liked to see Blizzard take some bigger swings and try some more innovative stuff, all told, the core of Diablo 4, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing through it, and I am pumped to dive in this week and play the game with everyone else. I do have some critiques, but ultimately, the worst part about playing the review build last week is when the servers went offline, because I just wanted to keep on playing.
That's the best kind to end this, because he was so excited and he was having so much fun that ending it just felt bad. And that's exactly what you want to have, like the feeling that, you know, not being able to play is bad for you because you've been having so much fun. All in all, this wraps up with exactly what I was expecting. I mean, the game is nothing crazy groundbreaking. It's an updated Diablo version. It has good mechanics. The whole core is super solid. Nightmare dungeons are difficult. You can get to the point where you're broken, and I think that's also what you want to. Like, you want to collect the exact items. You want to, you know, make your character really, really, really good, but then you also want to be rewarded for that because you take smart choices, you get your Paragon levels and everything, so you want to feel strong. I mean, still the highest level Nightmare dungeons should be hard, or the level 100 boss should be hard, but you want to feel strong because you've been working on feeling strong the whole time. And again, this is like talking about softcore, probably. He's been playing softcore, non-hardcore. If you play hardcore, everything is obviously a little bit different. Like, you're going to feel strong, but there's still this danger of dying the whole time. It's going to be very interesting. I'm hardcore looking forward to this. We're going to be streaming on Twitch. We're going to be streaming on YouTube. We're going to be creating guides, videos, everything. And again, if you want to know which world tier you should choose, there's a video here. And also, if you want all the mechanics explained, what overpower exactly does, how the damage being is calculated, multiplicative, additive damage, injured, overpowered, healthy, whatsoever, yep, that's the video you're looking for as well. Thank you for watching.